Hello, voters and vacillators. My name is Devious Guy, and I win. I win. Me. I am the one who has won. Because, you see, let me explain. Because a little while ago, I made a video explaining that Volibear should be the champion who wins the poll to select the next champion who gets a visual and gameplay update. And lo and behold, the results are in, and Volibear has won, which means I, by the transitive property of winning, have also won. I'm the winner. I am the victor. It was me. It was my voice. It was my arguments that swung vote clearly and definitively entirely in Volibear. No one else even got any votes, I'm sure. Like, there's charts down here and stuff. No one got any other votes. There's nobody else is getting a visual and gameplay update. It's only Volibear, and it was 110% because of my video that caused everyone, literally every person in the entire world agreed with me that Volibear was the one who should get the update, which is why he's getting one. Everyone, even your dad, like your dad agrees with me and he thinks your opinion is stupid. So I win, I'll take my prize in money. Just please send me money. Because I don't want to get into it, but there's some Russians, and I was supposed to get a thing that they paid me for, and I couldn't, and now, look, if a guy named Dimitri asks, don't tell him I'm here doing this, because they can trace me. Anyway, let's talk about what shape the upcoming reworks should take. Fiddlesticks and Volibear, of course, both won the vote for who should get the next visual and gameplay update. And there's some interesting breakdowns of like how people voted globally and how they voted by region, where China seemed to have a preference for Shyvana, which I thought was quite interesting. And that, you know, and I wonder if that's going to shape the style of her rework, because like Dragons is a very Chinese influenced thing, and they've already got Xin Xiao in Demacia, who's got that Ionian influence that he's carrying over, so maybe they're going to do a bit more of an aesthetic mixing. I don't know, it could be interesting. Well, maybe she'll just get a skin, who knows. Anyway, alongside the, you know, expected PR talk and so the stats breakdown that Riot usually posts alongside these things with some quotes from various Rioters who are talking about how excited they are to do this thing, they also posted what I would call early exploration sketches for possible directions that they could take the champions in. Now, I want to stress something right up front. These are early exploration. These are conceptualizations. These are like artists do dozens and dozens of these for champions, for updates, for literally everything. These are like, let's get ideas onto paper and just like throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks. So none of these have any guarantee whatsoever to be part of what the rework eventually ends up looking like. You can especially see that in the Fiddlestick sketches, that they are much more about exploring as many different possible forms of this basic idea as you can, just like everything. And then you sort of cull whatever design elements work, and then you kind of bring some of those forwards into new design ideas, and that's how the design process works. So don't take any of these as indications of what the rework is actually finally going to look like. And by the way, I'm quite excited that Jared Rosen is going to be the narrative writer on Fiddlesticks, because he's really freaking good at writing creepy and horror stuff, and he's also fairly decent at writing comedy, as it happens. And so I'm quite excited for the lore that's going to be coming out of Fiddlesticks, because that seems right up Jared's alley. But that's not what this video is going to be explicitly about. What we're going to be talking about is the little concept sketches that they posted, because there's a lot here to talk about. There's a lot of interesting stuff to analyze, and we can have a little discussion, a little conversation about what kinds of things should be culled from these sketches, like what kinds of visual ideas do I think, at least personally, should be brought forward into the full rework that these champions are going to be receiving. And we're going to be starting with Fiddlesticks. Now, again, all of these are just explored. I really want to stress this. When Riot posts these things, it's not because they're giving you a preview of what the character is actually going to look like. It's because they're showing you, like, this is the breadth of exploration that we go through. And for me, I always love these things, because it's in the concept phase that artists get to really just be crazy and go out there and do all kinds of weird, like give Fiddlesticks like 10 hands that are coming out from under his cloak, which is a really funny idea. Stuff that'll never make it into the game because it's way too out there, but which I wish would make it into the game, because League of Legends does have a tendency to go with the safer option more often than the edgy, interesting, weird, out there one. So for Fiddlestick specifically, you can see they've placed his basic design basically here in the middle. This is Fiddlestick more or less as he looks in the game today. And then you have all these iterations, and the ones that I particularly like, I really like this, like, I really like the idea of multi-hands Fiddlesticks, like just this horrifying monstrosity that has severed limbs just kind of grasping at you from under every part of his cloak, because that kind of captures that uncanny horror, right? Like when you see something that shouldn't be a scarecrow with human arms just kind of grasping out of it. That's the kind of horror imagery that really would make Fiddlesticks a kind of terrifying champion, to my mind. I maybe wouldn't put like the spike tongue that he's got going on out of his hood there, and also I would not give Fiddlesticks like a pointy hood. I would shy away from doing that, because long pointy hoods, and especially when combined with Hangman's nooses, have like some unfortunate implications, especially in American history, but just like literally everywhere at this point. And that brings us to the Hangman's noose. Now, the noose has been a part of Fiddlesticks' character design for a very long time, and it's like you can kind of see the idea that the Hangman's noose is a symbol of not only of death, but of a criminal's death oftentimes. Like, that's what you think of when you think of criminals, is people who were hung by the neck until dead. Or, indeed, that's the trouble with the pointy hood, is then you're going to think about lynching victims, which is a whole different conversation that League of Legends maybe doesn't want to have about its character design. And I would do away with the Hangman's noose, honestly, because it's kind of a cheap trick. Like, having the Hangman's noose is kind of a cheap trick for making a character, like, associate with death and crime and punishment and stuff like that. And I definitely get the idea that Fiddlesticks should be associated with punishment, because, like, originally, in the original lore of League of Legends that he had when he was first released, he was an executioner. He was a creature that the summoners of the League used to execute criminals with. What that was his horrifying purpose. And so the Hangman's noose in that sense made a certain degree of sense, I guess. In the modern state of the game, though, like, you would need a very compelling reason to keep it on him, I think, because as it is right now, it just kind of invites uncomfortable questions. It doesn't really... He's a scarecrow, right? He's supposed to be this Eldricht country horror style creature that's like the horror of the great wide open spaces and the empty farm fields where all of a sudden you hear something rustling in the corn and you don't know what it is. Like that kind of like Americana urban horror. Not urban, country horror, not urban. Country horror, literally the opposite of urban horror, is what I mean. That's kind of where Fiddlesticks, with his scarecrow motif and that whole thing, like, because what I find interesting about scarecrows as frightening monsters is this idea that humans have cultivated the land, right? We've come there, we've built our fields, we've cut down the trees, we've destroyed the forests, we're building on top of ancient burial grounds, probably without knowing it, and we're growing food in that soil. So, what if there was something evil in that soil? Like something that doesn't want us to be there? Something that wants revenge for all the abuses we have inflicted on the land, or just something cruel and malevolent that lives in the earth and which we have let out, which seeps into the nearest physical form it can find, and that's the scarecrow, and that's where it comes from. That, to me, is like the core of what you could do with interesting horror ideas for Fiddlesticks. Like, if you really want to keep the scarecrow thing going, and some of these character designs don't really seem to be interested in the scarecrow thing. Like, this one down here takes more of a plague doctor approach to him with blade legs, which might be honing in a little bit too much on Camille's territory. And you can kind of see the same thing going on here, where you have this is almost like a Silent Hill monster, a Pyramid Head style monster, where you have, which I also quite like, is that, again, you have the multiple arms thing going on, where it's almost like it's two humans that are being stretched out over each other, which really would look at home in Silent Hill, but again, it doesn't really have that rustic rural horror thing going on, which is where I like the idea of the grasping arms, right, with the juxtaposition of the scarecrow, the fake man, the straw man, like the lifeless man who shouldn't be able to move, and then actual physical, like literal human arms sticking out of that. That juxtaposition of things that should not go together is absolutely excellent, and I love it. I can kind of see what they're going for with the fat Fiddlesticks down here, like the bulging where he seems to be containing something that's straining to get out, which would be a really good, like, visual thing to go for with his crow storm, is that he literally explodes and crows fly out everywhere, so that he's like this walking mass of crows in a sack, like, that bounces forward. That's an idea that I quite enjoy. Like, that's something I really quite like as an idea. I don't necessarily like it as an idea for Fiddlesticks, because Fiddlesticks, he's supposed to be this thin, kind of bendy, unnatural moving, shaky, jerky creature, which is kind of where I think that character more belongs. One thing I'd like them to question more is the scythe. Like, the scythe makes sense because it's a farming tool, it's a farming implement, it comes from that farming tradition out in the countryside and the staining in cornfields, like all of that, it's very well associated with that, but Fiddlesticks has never used the scythe for anything. Like, he has never been a melee attack champion, so like, his new kit would have to include something where his scythe is actually doing stuff and he's not just using it as like a wand to throw his fear spell at enemies, like, because the scythe is such a prominent part of his character design. Having it there and then not having it be central to at least one of his abilities or one of the things that he does to people, right? Like, it needs to be, if he's carrying the scythe, it needs to be because it's central to how he terrifies people, it's central to how he hurts people, how he harms people. And if he's gonna be a full-on mage, then honestly, I would consider getting rid of it. Like, I would consider removing the scythe, or else turning it more obviously into a wand thing, rather than a melee weapon. Because that to me has always been one of the weaknesses of Fiddlesticks' design, is that scythe was entirely superfluous. And some of the designs do that. You can see this one here kind of tries to adapt the idea of a sharp-bladed thing into, what if Fiddlesticks' skeleton was just made up of bear traps? Like, basically these traps and scissors and things. You have one here where they turned it into a saw instead, which is kind of more terrifying because the saw has this jagged edge thing going on. That's kind of more scary in a lot of ways. Like, to see something coming at you with this thing, I'm going to saw you in half with this jagged, ruined thing, is kind of more scary than I'm going to slice you open with this very sharp scythe. Because, like, the sharp scythe at least seems less painful in the immediate. And you can see the kind of experiment with getting the jagged blade in there sometimes. Like, and if you're gonna have a scythe, I would want it to be like old and rusty and crusted and kind of like stained with blood, or just kind of horrible looking, all in like this old rusted scythe that has been in the middle of a cornfield for like 50 years and has almost rusted away to nothing. That's the thing I would want to see. If you want to goddamn keep it, then it needs to be a symbol of decay and destruction and terror all on its own. It can't be sharp, it can't be sort of cool looking, it has to be kind of hoary and old and withered and awful. This one I don't really know. It seems they're kind of exploring, with these two characters in particular, they're kind of exploring shape language around a robotic Fiddlesticks, which I think is an interesting idea, but perhaps more for a skin than for the actual champion himself. And, oh, down here there was a really cool concept that Fiddlesticks, he has this cloak on him, but that's not where his eyes are. Like, you have this face on the cloak that's not actually his face. His actual face is hidden somewhere within. You can see these little eyes just kind of peeking out from underneath the cloak. I really like that as an idea as well. Like, this idea that the cloak he's wearing on top of him is not his skin, but a mask that he's wearing, essentially. That's a really cool idea. Like, hiding the horror underneath is a good way to kind of instill quiet dread on a character. And then there's these two here, which do a good job of incorporating the bird aspect of Fiddlesticks, which is something, again, that the basic character design kind of neglects. Like, the whole crows are very central to his thematic. The crow storm, the whole thing about jumping, it's very central to what Fiddlesticks has become in the community, especially. He's become very much about his ultimate, about the crows. So incorporating the crows into his design explicitly is a good idea. For instance, here you can see that his body is a cage, a bird cage, from which the crows are then released physically. And here you can see there's a more explicit focus on incorporating the birds as just kind of sitting on his limbs as part of his design. Now, the trouble with that is to have the birds constantly present on him, I feel like would decay his menace a little bit. Like, they would need to be really scary looking birds, because if they're just like normal ass looking birds, then it's like, well, normal ass birds are sitting on that guy. Why should I be scared? He's got birds on him. What's he gonna do, right? Like it's not really terrifying until the birds suddenly take flight because the thing starts to move, you know? I would like the idea that when Fiddlesticks is in the game, he's constantly got birds circling him. Like, there's always a little raven circling above him. Not that, like, the enemies can't see the raven unless he's in vision, obviously, but, like, for the player Fiddlesticks, there's always, like, a raven kind of circling him, or ravens flying somewhere nearby, perching nearby. It's kind of the same thing they're doing with Swain, who always has his ravens, like, perching nearby with Fiddlestick. Then there would be crows. I like that idea a lot. That would bring some menace to him, and it would also be cool. Like, if anytime Fiddlesticks is on the field, enemies will see like crows just kind of hanging out on trees and in brushes. Whether or not Fiddlesticks is nearby, they're just always there reminding you that Fiddlesticks is somewhere. Always worry about Fiddlesticks. Always think about Fiddlesticks. Like that as a concept, I really like, especially if they don't show up until he gets his ultimate. Although that might be giving the enemy information. I don't know. That will be a game design balance thing. This one I don't really like because it has literally nothing to do with a scarecrow, but you can see what they're doing here, right? You can see how each of these concepts is exploring a different shape language for Fiddlesticks. It's a whole bunch of different physical shapes that they're testing out to see what works. This one I don't like because, again, you know, pointy white hood, not good, bad reference. But this one I don't like because it's more just like a standard hunchback kind of creature, deformed hunchback thing. That kind of wouldn't work. It would work for me more if it was like a shambling pile of sticks, basically. Right? Like, that, it looked like that because it was just sticks pointing out, and it was walking with sticks that just kind of, like, when it's walking, when it's moving, new sticks just kind of poke out of its cape every once in a while. It's not like it's walking with legs. It's like the whole body is deforming itself to move him across the battlefield. This one here is just way too edgelord. Like, this feels a lot like, this feels like a bad villain from a Spawn comic or something like that. That's way too much. It's blades and sharp stuff and blades and teeth and blah. That's some 90s edgelord nonsense that I would prefer that they don't go with. Let's see, any other interesting designs on display here? Well, I mean, there's the idea of incorporating the scythe into his arms directly, which would be a good idea. You can see them experimenting with that here. Except, again, Fiddlesticks doesn't really use melee attacks in his current form, so it would have to include some more melee actual thing with him, which I think, like, as an idea for the rework, given that Fiddlesticks' whole thing is about ambushing people, is about showing up all of a sudden out of nowhere with a storm of crows around him, I think the idea of him suddenly jumping on you and just kind of slashing at you like a maniac would be a strong thematic place to go. So if you really want to bring the scythe into it, that would be a way to do it. This one too, also kind of way too edgelord. They seem to be exploring yet again sort of a mechanical horror Fiddlesticks concept there with these tentacle arms and robot legs and stuff like that, which again, is not really the direction I'm hoping that they take on him. But yeah, I think that's about it for... Oh, there's something a little bit interesting about this one. It's a bird. You see, it's got the wings and the like the bird feet in the sense of trying to incorporate the shape language of a crow more directly into his character design, which again, I really feel like he should be visibly a scarecrow. Like, he should be visibly based on that in order for his character design to really make sense, in order for the crow storm wheat field, you know, thing to really work. And going away from the scarecrow as a visual starting point would be changing his identity too much. Moving on. A little bit less to talk about here, at least theoretically. It's only taken me 18 minutes to get this far, so hey, if you're still watching at this point, good job holding out. Here's the Volibear, and I say the Volibear because, well, that may be his new name when he gets reworked, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, because if you remember, maybe, I've done a video about this, in the recent story that was uploaded to the universe, Silence for the Damned, and this was kind of the whole reason why I was making this massive, long-ass argument about why Volibear should win the visual update contest, is that Volibear is no longer a bear. Like, he's no longer like a bear with armor who is a tribal leader in the Freljord. He's a god. Well, a demigod, because you don't have real gods on Runeterra, technically. But he's, as close as makes no difference, a god of the Freljord. But he's not one of the nice gods. He's not one of the comprehensible, simple, understandable gods. No. Volibear is a horrifying Lovecraftian god. He's a horrifying Eldricht god. He's an old god of some ancient pagan barbarian tribe that worships blood and pain and suffering. Like, that's the kind of god that he is. He's this ancient, terrifying, overpowering presence that consumes the minds of others just by being near them, and which is this monstrosity of lightning barely held together in the shape of a bear, like that has blood and guts pouring out all over from the ancient wounds on his body. That's what the Volibear is described as in Silence for the Damned, and we'll get into that in a second. So, here's some interesting character concepts that I kind of hope they don't go with, really. The first one that caught my eye was this one, where you've got this ring of, I think it's smoke, like a thundercloud, basically kind of flowing around his body, which is an interesting idea. You can kind of see that they're exploring that over here as well, that Volibear is literally like, he's literally the embodiment of a storm cloud that's always following him, which I think would be a good way to connect him more explicitly to the environment, like, because he is an environmental god. He is a god of thunder, so the idea of constantly having a storm cloud floating around him or empowering him, or just like kind of being near him so that he's more explicitly the embodiment of the storm, that would be a good visual signifier. I'm not sure how you would do it in game, like, because you have visual clarity issues in game where you can't have a cloud hovering over your champion all the time, because if the cloud is not sufficiently transparent, you might have trouble seeing what your champion is doing and where they're going, and it also might make their character model seem larger than it actually is, which makes it hard for opponents to aim their skill shots correctly and stuff like that. So there's some balancing issues in terms of the game design where I would be careful about this kind of idea, outside of, like, maybe he activates an ability and a storm cloud shows up and, like, throws lightning at him to make him more powerful. That would be a way to go. But the thing I really, like, from the designs that I'm seeing here, this is the one I really like, because this is the one that shows him as an ancient god of battle, that shows him as the unstoppable bear, like, where the terrifying aspect of him is this idea of a bear that's charging at you, and you're throwing, like, you're trying to, like, stab it in the face, you're trying to fight off, you're doing everything, it's got spears in its back and axes, and nothing stops it. Like, this thing where you can stab it 100 times, and it's still gonna get you, and it's still gonna kill you, and it's still gonna maul you to death before it even realizes that it has technically been injured. That's a good angle to take in why Volibear is terrifying, is like, yeah, you can hit him as much as you want, he's not going to stop. He's never going to stop because he is the thunder, he is the storm, he is the unstoppable bear, he's the constant charging, bellowing, horrifying bear. And that's also a good aspect to have for a war god, someone who can take 1,000 wounds and keep fighting. That makes him really solid as, like, a war deity, which is also what he seems to be occupying for a role in the League of Legends lore at the current state. So, these are exploratory concepts for what Volibear could look like, but let's take a look at how he's described in the actual lore. This is from that story, Silence for the Damned, which is the first look we've had at the new direction that Volibear has taken, so let me read you a few passages from it. This is Sejuani and Udyr are summoning Volibear and his Ursine tribe because they need his help in battle. Now they were appearing. Then came the monsters. They were strange amalgamations of bears and other creatures, things of legend, dreams, and folklore. They had all been men once, too, but now so consumed by the true spirit, that's the Volibear, they had passed beyond what the normal animals looked like. The largest of them, a huge bear-like thing, lumbered out of the forest. Where its head should have been, a decayed elk's skull rested on a mane of black feathers. Eyes glowing with blue fire, it opened its jaws to reveal a child's face inside its maw. Then the child opened its own mouth too, spewing a foul brown liquid. Other nightmares followed it from the woods, limping, crawling, and shambling forward. Then we have a description of Volibear itself. In the forest behind Najak, the great black leaf trees cracked and shook. Taller than a mammoth, it stepped out of the woods. Walls of muscle, each limb larger than a man, propelled the beast forward. Its broken, ancient armor of dark metal plates was caked brown by the dried gore of 100 battles. Broken weapons, rusted with age, jutted from its back and shoulders. One half of its face had been stripped of flesh, revealing oily bone, teeth, and horns. From its mouth an unnatural black blood dripped. Its 4 eyes, impossibly ancient, alien, and pitiless, looked over Sejuani and Udyr. Then, later in the story, Volibear has joined Udir and Sejuani's battle. It has consumed the dead of a great battle and seems to be rejuvenating himself, and Udir goes to confront it. Udir climbed up the rubble of a stairway to a ruined square. Surrounded by tall stone buildings, he found the monster waiting for him. Alone and in the middle of the city, the bear spirit's avatar impaled corpses on stakes arranged in some unknowable pattern. Black branches and roots grew from the spirit bodies around the beast like worms slowly crawling from the earth. The flesh and fur in the Volibear's face had healed. Its muscles seemed thicker, stronger than before. The Volibear's eyes turned to Udir as the shaman approached. Across its face, a dozen new eyes bloomed, each as dark and cold as a spider's. Perhaps it smelled the foreign magic on the Winter's Claw shaman and now deemed him worthy of examination. Somehow Udir knew this time. It spoke to him alone.
I will be reborn. You cannot stop that, son of man,
the beast said. That is Udir. That is Volibear in the current conception of the lore, where it seems like the avatar, like the physical shape that we see in the world, is not really Volibear necessarily, but it is a body that it possesses, that it takes for itself and twists into a shape that is useful for it. A shape which will have as many as 12 black, spider-like, pitiless, cold eyes. Like 12 eyes on a bear. Think about that visual image for a second. Like this ancient, hulking brute of lightning. Like, that's another scene in the story describes that when it gets angry, it almost kind of tears itself apart and sort of reveals that it's just a skin suit that is stretched over a huge ball of angry lightning that's straining to burst out of its form, right? So you have this idea of the bear less as the actual character and more as the temporary suit that the spirit is wearing for the moment, and which it will rejuvenate by eating the flesh and drinking the blood of its dead enemies. That's a really good, terrifying concept, and that's where the idea of having the thunderstorm following the bear is kind of interesting and comes into play, in that you could have gameplay mechanics where the bear charges at enemies and just, like, tears itself apart or explodes. Like, maybe for the ultimate, like, it charges into the middle of the enemies and just kind of explodes in a huge ball of lightning, and then reconstitutes itself with, like, flesh and blood that it gathers from the battlefield and makes itself a new suit to walk around in. Those would be really interesting concepts. Now, that might be taking it a little bit too far from the original Volibear, and that's the problem that the Riot character designers are going to be facing with Volibear, is they want to rework him. They've clearly already internally decided that this is the kind of thing that Volibear is going to be, this horrifying, ancient, alien, unknowable consciousness that sort of uses human beings as fuel more than as compatriots or fellow fighters in battle. This inhuman, godlike, but also terrifying thing. But Volibear also has a very defined shape in League of Legends. Like, he has a very defined character design. He is an armored bear, and you can see like where the idea of having the thunderstorm always following the bear around kind of comes into play with these designs, is they're kind of trying to bridge that gap of having classic Volibear-ish looks going on, while also nodding towards the idea that the bear is not all that Volibear is. You can kind of see how they're going for shaman imagery, like that you see, for like instance, from Native Americans, with some of like the long braids and stuff. Like, that's imagery that's kind of associated with those ideas, especially Inuit, and that would be a good place to draw from. Like, I've often argued that League of Legends needs to draw from more widely interesting sources than just, you know, Vikings and medieval Europe and Egypt, like all those commonly understood normal ones, like Magic Asia, which is the entirety of Ionia. It would be interesting if they drew more from indigenous cultures that you don't see so much of in video games, like, for instance, Inuit cultures, or like South American culture, which is really not very well represented in League of Legends at all, outside of a few skins. And like things like that would be interesting to incorporate more. So it would take some care. Like, you have to be careful about that stuff, that you don't, like, accidentally, oh, here's an interesting visual aesthetic thing from the Inuit people, let's grab that one without thinking, and it turns out you've just, like, appropriated a holy symbol of a religion or some incredibly important cultural aspect of their culture, and just like, oh, we're just gonna slap that on a monster bear who hates everything and just send it out into the world. That's not insensitive at all, which is, like, you know, for the same reason that Christians might get a little upset if you take Jesus and, like, have him hang upside down on a cross and shout "Hail Satan," right? You have to be a little bit careful when you incorporate that stuff. But that would be a risk I think would be worth taking with Volibear, is to really kind of try to dive into the old ghost stories and horror stories that are associated with Native Americans of various types. Like maybe some of the tribes that are native to what is now Canada, or Inuit tribes, or indeed just like American Plains Indians. There's all kinds of interesting storytelling traditions you can draw from there, where you can bring some of their ideas about, like, some of their relationships to nature and the world and thunderstorms and bears, like, bring that into the visual language of League of Legends. That would be interesting. That would add a new dimension of design, especially to the Freljord, which has always kind of just been, oh, it's Vikings. It's just Viking, and, like, Scandinavia is cool and all. I live there. I like Viking aesthetics, but there's so much more you can do with the High North, right? Like the Arctic Circle covers a good large bit of the planet there. You can get stuff from Russia. You can get stuff from, like, northern China. Well, they're not in the Arctic Circle, but you know what I mean. You could even draw stuff like from certain. Is there a part of Japan that's inside the Arctic Circle? I can't actually remember. You know, Northern America, like, or Svalbard, or the Sami people from way the hell up north in Scandinavia. The Finns. There's all kinds of interesting visual traditions you can draw from that aren't just, like, some Vikings that existed for, like, maybe 500-600 years for a while in Scandinavia and then were wiped out by Christianity. So yeah. Of the designs here, like, that are on display specifically, I like this one the most because it emphasizes the whole unstoppable war bear idea of him with the weapons jutting out of him. I really think having weapons stuck into him is a really strong visual element that I hope they bring forward into the actual Volibear, especially because metal weapons could be excellent conductors for electricity. You could have, like, lightning abilities where you can see the electricity kind of arcing between the weapons that are stuck in his back, or he's using them as lightning rods to attract more power. That would be some really cool visual elements. I do want them to undress him a little bit. Like, I don't want him to be all covered up in armor and like equipment like that. I want more something along the lines of what's described in the story, like he's wearing this ancient black kind of, not necessarily rusty, but just kind of caked in blood kind of old armor from some civilization that's long ago destroyed. That doesn't really look like it's from the modern, air quotes, Freljord. It doesn't have that Viking aesthetic. It has the aesthetic of something that's much older and perhaps a little bit more alien. That would be interesting to me. Anyway, I think I have rambled on enough about how I won, and I am the winner, and therefore you should like this video. I don't know, you can like the video if you want, and then that's helpful to me because, you know, YouTube wants the numbers to go up, and if they don't go up, they kill me. Literally physically come to my house and murder me with a knife. So, you know, like the video, comment, subscribe, bell icon, all the other YouTube stuff, all of that is very good for me. If you want to help support the channel more directly, there's also Patreon where you can sign up for a subscription, $1 a month, if you want to, or I have some tip jars where you can do a one-time donation to say, hey, you rambled for 30 minutes about scarecrows and bears full of lightning, so you can have $3, my friend, or $1, or $10, or $1,000, like any amount. Like, you could do any amount that you want of those particular choices, and also other choices, and I'd be very grateful. As I say at the end of my videos, even these very long, rambly ones, $1 to a content creator like me means the same as thousands of views on a video or tens of thousands of views on a web page. So whether it's me, or it's some webcomic artist that you like, or a vlogger, or another YouTuber, or someone on Instagram who does, like, custom icons for people, if you can support a content creator that you like directly, please consider doing so, because even $1 to us means a lot more than you think. Anyway, if you haven't enjoyed this video, well, there's a dislike button right down below, and you know how to use those things. You just click on it, and then you are instantly transported to a completely alternate universe that's based on one of your favorite video games, where you have to try and survive and make your way through the world and destroy the Demon King before you are finally ended. There's just one problem. You have been transformed into a cat, coming this season to Crunchyroll. Thank you very much for watching.